When I turned my own health around, I had to go see my doctor because I had a surgery scheduled and I didn't want to have it, but I had to go in for the checkup. And I walked in there, and you can imagine, again, I told you my mother couldn't recognize me. So you have to imagine that visually I look very different, and metrics wise, I was a very different human being. And at no point during my meeting in that doctor's office did any of the nurses, assistants, or the doctor himself ask me WTF. Like they should have said, what the hell just happened here? Nobody asked me that. What they did do is spend a lot of time trying to convince me that I should still have the surgery because, the symptoms will probably come back and you don't want to end up on the waiting list and you don't want to be in pain. It was like, I basically felt like I was sitting with a bunch of unscrupulous used car salesmen trying to save the sale. Now, I asked the doctor a question that day, and I was 21 and I looked about 15. So it was pretty impetuous. I imagine he didn't like it very much, but I asked him, how long he'd gone to medical school. And he sort of did a sideways glance at his degree hanging on the wall. And he goes, well, 6 years, young man. And I said, that's impressive. Like, and of that 6 years, how much of that time did you spend studying nutrition? And to these days, people aren't so shocked by the answer anymore. But this was 30 years ago. And when I heard him say none, I didn't even know what to do with that information. At first I thought he must be being facetious. This can't be true. And then when I realized it was totally true, I suddenly felt like I'm on a 747 flying over the North Atlantic, finding out the pilots never learned about landings. Like what do you mean you didn't study nutrition? And sadly, I've now asked that question of countless, like dozens and dozens and dozens of doctors all around the world. And what I found is there's only one country that has nutrition as a prerequisite educational requirement for a medical degree, and that's Albania. Now, one day I'm sitting talking to my uncle about this, who was an orthopedic surgeon. So we're talking 12 years in school. And I asked him the same question, and he cocked his head to one side like a dog does when it's a bit confused. And he realized that it was a really good question. And what really bothered him is that he'd never asked the question himself. So the first thing is to recognize is that even if the doctors around us aren't asking this question, then there's a societal problem. There's a group hypnosis that's going on, and that group hypnosis is a problem. And that group hypnosis happens to be incredibly profitable for the pharmaceutical industry. And that's a whole another conversation. But to your question of how do you begin to undo that for people? Well, I'll start with this. Recognize the tools that are being used against us. If you really if you want to go and study jiu-jitsu, you can learn all the great takedowns, and that's fabulous. But what you really want to learn is how to defend against takedowns. I mean, if you only learn the defenses, you can just tire somebody out and be done with it, right? Like learning the defenses is actually, in many ways, it's less sexy, but it's more important. And so, what are the attacks that the food industry use? Well, they put addictive substances in food. We know this. They put sugar in Coca-Cola to mask the salt, which is designed to make you thirsty, so you'll drink more, and you'll be addicted to the sugar and get that high. And never mind that there's literally an addictive substance by the way of caffeine in there. So we know they'll biochemically manipulate us. Then they'll use unbelievably manipulative psychological techniques. As my favorite example of this is watching a viral video of random acts of kindness. Most beautiful viral video ever created. It's like the most just CCTV footage of people doing amazing shit. Like this little old lady's trying to cross the snow in what looks like Chechnya in December, and she can't, and the cars won't stop. And then these two young men come along and they stop the traffic and they walk her across, and then somebody drops their wallet by the bank machine and somebody scoops it up to hand, and you just watch them, miracle after miracle after miracle, and it's just on. You get the goosebumps and you're feeling, boom, open happiness, Coca-Cola. Well, what they're doing there is Pavlovian. What they're doing is putting you into a peak emotional state and bam, tying your logo, tying their color and their logo and their Santa Claus that they invented to us. So they're manipulating our biochemistry, then they're manipulating our psychology, then they're manipulating our emotional states and our holidays. You now know that there's a cure. If you ask the average person, what's the random food cure for depression, they'll tell you it's chocolate or red wine or, something else. And so they've hijacked our emotional states, and then they've hijacked our holidays. You have people that live in America that will tell you they can't possibly do Easter without chocolate. Now, I went to an Anglican school as a kid, so, there were quite a lot of Bible study there. And I never once saw the word chocolate in that Easter section of the Bible. But now you got people who just, and then as for Christmas, I mean, the wise men brought frankincense, myrrh, and gold, not candy cane and Christmas cake. And yet now people feel they can't have that holiday. So as you go through those mechanisms and you begin to understand the manipulations of them and you empower people. There are even people here who are listening who the next time Easter comes along and they go, I can't have Easter. They're going to go, oh my God, Jesus didn't have chocolate. Just even that knowledge can give them what we call a Frankl moment, which is borrowed from Viktor Frankl, the idea of a momentary glimpse of consciousness that allows you to make a better decision. And that's really what we're doing. Here is what they're doing to manipulate you. Shine the brightest light you can on that. And I'll give you one great clue about this. Imagine somebody's trying to get off sugar. Good idea. I mean, I'm not anti-sugar. I'm just saying I'm anti-sugar at times. I think that there are good sugars and there are bad sugars and there's seasonal relationship with sugar and so on. But for people trying to get off refined sugar, they'll start with reading labels. Now, check this out. Imagine they read the label and they see sugar's the number 2 ingredient on their ragu tomato sauce or some garbage. And they go, it's number 2? Why is there so? And they get disappointed. They're like, I can't believe I can't have this thing. That's diet mentality, right? Diets don't work. I can't have this thing. If they put that down feeling sad and that they're missing out that they can't have it, I guarantee you they'll buy a chocolate bar at the checkout. That sadness is what triggers the next food decision. On the other hand, if you can explain to them why the sugar is there, it is not to balance the acidity of the tomatoes, because if it was, it would be the 10th ingredient. The reason that it's there is that we have an evolutionary response to sugar, and that is to stimulate your appetite. It was a survival mechanism. It's built into every sapien and every bear and every chipmunk and every squirrel, that when you eat the fall-centric foods, you stimulate your appetite. So if they can put sugar in the sauce, you'll eat twice as much sauce. Now you explain that to somebody and go into the biochemistry and the evolutionary biology of it. Now they look at the label and they go, those bastards, and they get angry. And then they put it down and they have freedom.
Yeah, and it's funny, you're delayering something that I also find myself more passionate about than I wish I was, but I think for the right reasons, as I can tell coming from you. So how have you, so from 20 until now, I'm sure you've even went through seasons of your approach to addressing this, probably even on the scale of like when you start to talk about the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry. Are you somebody like, are you optimistic about the way we're heading? Because personally, I look at people like you, companies like that you founded, and then just the general awareness on through media. And I would say it's actually a positive of things like the expansion of internet and social media, is that it's being talked about now more than ever. And I view that as a good thing. Even the sugar, the people testing and kind of tweaking with their diet, even things like carnivore are a good way for people to get a little bit of separation from what I would call is like the hum of their diet, and to start to be able to assess and say, hey, some of these skin issues I'm having, some of this behavioral issues I'm having, oh my God, I did this for 2 weeks and they went away. So do you remain, even though I know you look at the food industry, the pharmaceuticals, and it'll make you rip your hair out, do you remain optimistic in the direction we're heading as a species?
That's a tough question. I think that we're at a crossroads, and there's some things that we should remember. Every single generation has believed they were going to be the last one. Every generation has been afraid of the existential question. Even in 1900, you know how we all freaked out at Y2K? Well, when it switched over to 1900, there was the same freak out going on, and they didn't have computers with numbers. And I don't know why humans are so arrogant to think that the world would come to an end when our round number came, but we're like that. And so every generation has lived with that fear. We live with it now. We've got the doomsday clock. AI is very scary, and nuclear power is very scary, and pathogens are very scary. We are, I think we do need to be aware that we are smart enough now to create technologies that could be absolutely dangerous to us. And I suspect that, AI definitely falls into that category. But I think the other thing that we should look at, and this is incredibly important, is that we live in demonstrably the safest and best times of the human condition that has ever existed, ever, bar none, no matter what Fox or CNN says. The fact of the matter is that the media knows that they get their traffic from fear, and so they publish everything they publish everything that's scary, and they publish it in the worst possible way because it generates clicks. The minute some big terrorist attack happens, everybody goes to the news, and they make more money. So we live in a time when girls have the closest thing to parity they've ever had in education. And frankly, women are now ahead of men in post-secondary education. We live in a time when, despite the fact that children are being completely bubble wrapped by their parents. And I saw this post the other day. It was so cute. It was two millennials talking to each other. And he goes, don't mess with those Gen Xers. You know what I found out about them the other day? They used to walk themselves home from school. Oh, they had keys to their own houses and they made their own meals. Don't fuck with them, and it's like, I think there's something to that, right? And now the kids are bubble wrapped. If you leave your kids at the park, some neighbor's going to call social services and say you're a bad parent. And yet what's crazy is that crimes against children statistically are literally half of what they were in 1970. We live in the very best time to be alive. So in that sense, I'm pretty damn optimistic. We are also in a place where capitalism, which is the best system we currently have for value exchange, is absolutely devastating when it comes to healthcare and food production. And as long as capitalism maintains the food production world and the pharmaceutical world, we're in deep trouble. And so, funny enough, you mentioned in the introduction, I just pre-released this book called The Evolution Gap. And The Evolution Gap talks about a disparity between our biological evolution, which is painfully slow, and our incredible and accelerating capacity for innovation. And I would put to you that almost every disease, every mental health issue, and almost all social issues owe themselves or their severity to that gap. And so some people hear me talk about that and they go, oh, are you suggesting that we sell everything and go and move to the forest and live a primitive life? I'm like, well, if you would enjoy that, I think it's not a bad idea at all. But I think the bigger opportunity here is to take the wisdom from what we know about our evolutionary history and our ancestral past and the incredible innovations we're making and marry those things to create the most phenomenal quality of life possible. And I know that that's true on an individual basis today. And I believe that on a social level, it's possible that we can do that for everybody.